In the heart of old Istanbul, beyond the dazzling palaces, bustling bazaars, and echoing calls to prayer, a quieter world breathes in the shadows. This isn't a place you'll find on any map. Here, the clamor of the city melts away, replaced by drifting smoke, whispered confessions, and the weary eyes of those seeking a brief escape from reality. Lost souls gather in these hidden corners, not for grand celebration, but for a profound silence. It's a gentle, yet dangerous quiet, one that promises relief, but slowly steals everything else. Behind closed doors and beneath the soft glow of dim lanterns, dreams are inhaled, memories blur, and lives gently slip into a twilight existence. This is where sorrow finds a place to rest, where hope dims, and where history itself has learned to whisper instead of shout. Join us as we uncover the forgotten stories of this city. Step into the winding alleys of old Istanbul, where the air hangs heavy with smoke and whispers. Lantern light flickers on ancient stone, and shadows dance across the cobblestones. From behind closed doors, a faint, intoxicating scent drifts out, the scent of opium. It's an aroma that promises escape, a soft oblivion from the world outside, but it comes with a hidden cost, one paid by those who breathe it in too deeply. Inside these dimly lit dens, time itself seems to warp and bend. Reality and dreams bleed into one another. Patrons, nestled on soft cushions, let the sweet vapor carry them away from the bustling ports, from the weight of societal expectations, from lives they feel they can no longer live. Some come here to forget. Others come to explore the farthest reaches of consciousness, chasing visions they can find nowhere else. In these smoky sanctuaries, all are equal. Artists, merchants, soldiers, and scholars sit side by side, bound together by the haze and the shadows. They are suspended in a world that demands nothing from them, but reveals everything. Conversations are quiet, deliberate, punctuated by long, thoughtful pauses as the smoke thickens and the world outside simply fades away. Eyes glaze over, hands tremble slightly, and lips whisper secrets meant for no one. Here, pain and longing mingle with moments of fleeting joy. Time becomes a slippery thing, flowing like water, carrying dreams on beautiful, yet treacherous currents. But the story of Istanbul's opium dens isn't just one of simple indulgence. It's a story about society, about the stark contrasts between poverty and wealth, and the universal human experiences of longing and despair. These dens were a mirror reflecting the city itself, an Ottoman world caught between breathtaking grandeur and slow decay, between rigid tradition and unstoppable transformation. They were places where the forbidden and the familiar intertwined, where the powerful and the powerless shared the same cushions, and where every single inhalation was a negotiation between desire and destruction. The people who frequented these dens became known as the Dream Eaters. They weren't monsters, they were ordinary humans, drawn in by the mysterious allure of this hidden world. Some were artists seeking inspiration for their next masterpiece. Some were soldiers seeking relief from the horrors of war. And some were simply thrill-seekers, chasing the high of a reality completely untethered. As the smoke filled their lungs, the city outside carried on with its ceaseless rhythm. Boats glided along the Bosphorus, merchants haggled in crowded bazaars, children played in the stone-paved streets, and rulers orchestrated an empire with the precision of a maestro. But inside the dens, the world operated on different terms. Life wasn't measured by the clock or by duty. It was measured by sensation, by memory, and by the boundless power of imagination. The great paradox of the opium den was that it offered both total freedom and absolute captivity. To sink into the haze was to leave the burdens of the world behind, but that same haze could trap a person there indefinitely. The dreams it conjured were seductive, vivid, and unrelenting, slowly replacing reality with visions that were both intoxicating and haunting. Some patrons would emerge from the dens feeling renewed, their creative sparks ignited by their journeys into this inner world. But others never truly emerged at all. They were lost to the dreamscape, their bodies eventually returning to the city streets, while their minds wandered forever in a hazy limbo. This clandestine world existed quietly, tucked away in Istanbul's labyrinthine corners, just out of sight of polite society, but impossible to fully ignore. Merchants complained about the dens, artists wrote about them in secret, and families worried about loved ones who disappeared into their depths. The authorities themselves had a complicated relationship with them, oscillating between tolerance and suppression. The dens were often tolerated because they brought in commerce, and because many of the city's most influential men were patrons themselves, indulging in secret behind closed doors. At the same time, they were condemned because they served as a stark reminder that human desire, suffering, and mortality could not be controlled, not even by the most disciplined society. And so, the Dream Eaters continued their nightly rituals, inhaling, sinking, floating, dreaming. They were the lost souls of the Ottoman Empire's twilight years, a living reflection of a world in constant flux. They embodied a city straddling the line between old traditions and new pressures, between rigid discipline and raw indulgence, between life and the dream. This is a story of those who lived in the smoke, who chased visions in the haze, and who paid the invisible price for the fleeting freedom the dens offered. It is a story of humanity at its most vulnerable and honest, wrapped in opium and shadow, in the alleys and courts of one of the world's most magnificent cities. As night fell over Istanbul, the city's vibrant pulse began to slow. The clamor of the grand bazaar and the rush of the streets gave way to a deeper quiet, where lantern light flickered against ancient stone walls in winding alleys. It was in these hidden corners, behind unassuming doors, that a different world came to life, a world known only to a few, where people gathered not for celebration, but for escape. Imagine stepping into one of these rooms. The air is still, thick with the scent of old wood and something more, something intangible. Cushions are scattered in dim corners, and a profound silence hangs in the air, a silence that holds the weight of countless untold stories. People came here to find refuge from the crushing burdens of life, the emotional toll, the relentless pressure, the sheer exhaustion of being. They sought a momentary truce, a brief window where their worries could finally feel distant. These places had their own unique rhythm. Inside, time seemed to stretch and bend. Visitors would recline in the quiet, losing themselves in memories, daydreams, and deep contemplation. You might find a soldier, haunted by the horrors of battle, finally able to confront emotions he could never show in public. Beside him, an artist, creatively blocked by the anxieties of their craft, searching for a spark of inspiration in the stillness. And over there, a merchant, overwhelmed by debt and responsibility, wanting nothing more than a few hours of absolute peace. For a short while, the rigid social structures of the Ottoman Empire simply dissolved. The strict lines between class and status blurred and then vanished. Here, a high-born noble could sit beside a common laborer, sharing the same silence, the same quiet vulnerability. In the dim light, you'd see eyes staring into the distance, lost in thought. You might notice a hand trembling, not from cold or fear, but from the slow release of pent-up mental exhaustion. Whispers would drift through the room like fragile confessions, secrets shared with the shadows. These rooms were the great equalizers, not arenas of power or pride, but sanctuaries where hidden pain could finally surface. But like any escape, these dens held a dangerous allure, a hidden duality. What started as a search for relief could slowly morph into dependence. An initial curiosity could harden into a habit. The temporary comfort offered by these quiet nights could become a quiet reliance, a crutch one couldn't imagine living without. Visitors who came seeking solace found themselves returning again and again, feeling unable to face the harsh realities of their lives without the emotional numbness these sessions provided. The beautiful escape, so enchanting at first, often came with unseen consequences. A sense of calm could curdle into anxiety, and the search for inspiration could lead to deeper confusion. Many didn't realize the hold this world had on them until it was already too late to icily pull away. History often forgets to tell the stories of women, but they, too, found their way to these hidden sanctuaries. Bound by the strict expectations of society, they entered cautiously, seeking a rare moment of autonomy, a space where their own thoughts, feelings, and voices could finally matter. Some would write quietly in notebooks, their words flowing freely for the first time. Others simply sat in silence, cherishing the emotional freedom they were so rarely granted. For them, these dens represented a temporary escape from judgment. But this escape was fraught with its own risks and social dangers, making their presence an act of quiet rebellion. The rooms themselves seemed to absorb the human experiences they witnessed. The walls, stained by years of use, held the silent memories of joy, sorrow, fear, and regret. Flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to move with the collective sighs and whispers in the room. Every sound, the shuffle of feet, a faint cough, a quiet conversation, echoed with stories that would never be written down in any official history book. These dens were emotional sanctuaries, but they were also silent witnesses to the profound struggles of the human spirit. Of course, the consequences were inevitable. For some, the escape became an obsession. Their daily routines began to crumble. Sleep became elusive, appetites faded, and their connection to the world outside grew tenuous. The real world started to feel heavier, less welcoming, almost unbearable without the promise of retreating back into the dream. The psychological pull was incredibly strong, and stepping away became harder with each visit, each night spent in the quiet haze. The Ottoman authorities viewed these places with a mixture of tolerance and suspicion. Opium, the substance often at the heart of these dens, had a long and complicated history in the empire, used for both medicine and recreation. But as social concerns grew, these dens became morally and politically controversial. Some were quietly ignored, protected by powerful patrons who frequented them. Others were raided and shut down by the authorities. And yet, they persisted. They continued to exist for a simple reason. Human beings continued to struggle, and they continued to search for an escape. But to dismiss these rooms as mere dens of vice would be to miss the point entirely. There was so much more than that. They were spaces of profound reflection, creativity, deep sadness, and raw human truth. Within their walls, visitors confronted the very emotions they worked so hard to hide from the world, and from themselves. Some left with newfound clarity and insight, ready to face their lives with renewed purpose. Others left feeling even more lost, their fragile peace shattered by the morning light. And some discovered parts of themselves they never knew existed, revelations that would change them forever, for better or for worse. As dawn broke over the city, Istanbul would stir back to life. The Bosphorus would shimmer in the early morning light. The markets would awaken with a cacophony of sounds, and the familiar rhythm of life would resume. Inside the dens, visitors would slowly, reluctantly, reconnect with reality. Some emerged feeling strengthened, some shaken, some silently and irrevocably changed. And as the day wore on, the rooms would fall silent again, waiting patiently for another night, for another wave of human longing to wash up at their hidden doors. These dream-eaters of Istanbul, as we might call them, existed in that fragile, liminal space between imagination and reality. They weren't heroes or villains. They were simply people searching for relief, for understanding, for meaning in a world that often felt overwhelming. Their story is a powerful symbol of both our boundless creativity and our profound vulnerability. It's a reminder that behind the grand, sweeping narrative of history, another pulse beats the pulse of hidden emotions, silent struggles, and unspoken desires. It shows us that even in the mightiest of empires, every single person carries within them a private world of dreams, fears, and fragile hope. In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, amidst the ceaseless energy of Istanbul, lay hidden sanctuaries. The city outside never slept. The Bosphorus Strait was a silent river of moving ships. Market streets echoed with a symphony of voices, and moonlight draped itself over rooftops like a bolt of silver silk. But behind certain unassuming doors, the very rhythm of time seemed to bend. Inside these shadowed rooms, a different world existed. People gathered not for boisterous celebration, but for something far more elusive: silence, reflection, and a brief, precious reprieve from the crushing pressures of daily life. The rigid hierarchies of social rank, the heavy weight of responsibility, and the unending burden of expectation, all of it faded away for a few precious hours. Here, individuals could simply be. They could rest, breathe deeply, and allow their thoughts to drift, untethered. These spaces were magnets for the creative soul. Many artists came, not in search of decadence, but for the profound gift of stillness. Painters discovered moments of quiet contemplation, allowing colors and concepts to bloom in their minds. Writers let their thoughts flow without restraint, finally giving shape to feelings they normally kept locked away. These rooms became quiet crucibles of creativity and introspection, where the raw material of human experience was forged into art. Leaving these havens was a varied experience. Some departed feeling invigorated, their minds clear and buzzing with newfound inspiration. Others felt emotionally drained, as if they had wrestled with ghosts in the dim light. But no one left unchanged. Each visit, each night of quiet reflection, left its subtle mark. Time itself behaved strangely here. An hour didn't feel like an hour. It stretched and compressed in unpredictable ways. The silence wasn't empty. It was deep, almost a living presence in the room. Soft melancholic music might occasionally drift through the air, not to entertain, but to gently guide the weary mind toward peace. Shadows from lanterns flickered across the walls like dancing spirits, and hushed conversations would rise and fall like the softest of waves. For many, this environment wasn't about escaping reality, it was about confronting it. It was a space to face the thoughts and fears they diligently pushed aside during the day. In the quiet, under the gentle haze, the soul's hidden landscape was revealed. But this world held a darker side, a subtle and creeping danger. What began as a rare moment of relief could slowly, insidiously, beckon a person back, again and again. The allure of that perfect calm was powerful. Some visitors found it increasingly difficult to leave the habit behind. Nights spent in reflection stretched longer. Health began to fray. Emotions, once soothed, became heavier, more volatile. The fine line between serene contemplation and dependency started to blur. What had once promised freedom could quietly transform into a beautiful, gilded cage, a quiet burden. The profound beauty of the experience existed hand in hand with its peril, a stark reminder that even the sweetest comfort always carries a cost. History, so often written by men, rarely speaks of the women who also found their way into these spaces. Living under a suffocating blanket of social expectations, many sought a small taste of personal freedom, a moment of emotional breathing room. Here, they could shed the heavy costumes of daughter, wife, and mother. Some wrote quietly in private journals, their thoughts finally uncensored. Others simply sat, allowing themselves the rare luxury of just feeling human beyond roles, beyond judgment, beyond the male gaze. For these women, these rooms weren't an act of rebellion. They were a quiet, desperate claim for a few moments of mental and emotional independence. The places themselves felt alive, saturated with history. The walls seemed to have absorbed years of whispered fears, secret hopes, and unspoken dreams. The floors held the memories of countless footsteps, each carrying its own story of joy or sorrow. Everything within, from the plush cushions to the soft glow of the lanterns, was meticulously arranged to create an atmosphere of emotional release. Yet, just beneath that surface of tranquility, reality always lingered. The peace found here was borrowed, temporary. And as with any loan, there were consequences. The outcomes were as varied as the people who sought refuge. Some left with clearer minds, a deeper understanding of themselves, and a renewed sense of purpose. Others, however, descended into a spiral of dependence, confusion, and profound emotional exhaustion. The authorities of the empire viewed these dens with a cautious, ambivalent eye. They understood the deep human need these places fulfilled, but they were also acutely aware of the social and personal risks they posed. Sometimes they were tolerated. Other times, crackdowns were swift and severe. These establishments existed in a delicate, precarious balance, part sanctuary, part trap. But no matter what happened within those walls, the world outside marched on. Dawn would inevitably break, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. The markets would stir to life. Children's laughter would once again fill the streets. Responsibilities, momentarily forgotten, would return with the morning light. The visitors would step back into the harsh glare of reality, carrying with them either the spark of inspiration or the heavy weight of a quiet struggle. And as the day wore on, those silent rooms would wait. They would bide their time until nightfall, ready to once again open their doors and become sanctuaries of reflection, vulnerability, and the staggering complexity of the human heart. It was here that Istanbul revealed the hidden, more intimate side of itself, not a story of imperial glory or military might, but one of fragile, flawed humanity. These rooms were never just about indulgence. They were about the universal human condition, the longing, the pain, the wild leaps of imagination, the crippling weakness, the fire of creativity, and the ceaseless search for relief in a demanding, often unforgiving world. They remind us that behind the grand, sweeping events of history, there were always real people, people who were dreaming, hurting, and hoping and trying, in their own imperfect ways, to simply cope with the beautiful, terrible business of being alive. As the nights in Istanbul grew longer, its opium dens began to feel like separate worlds. Hidden behind unassuming carved doors, these dimly lit rooms existed alongside the city, yet felt a universe away. Stepping inside was like crossing an invisible line, leaving the weight of daily life at the threshold. It was a space where emotions deepened, thoughts stretched, and the mind could wander into landscapes it rarely dared to explore. These dens weren't always loud or dramatic. More often, they were strangely peaceful. The silence itself had a voice, a calm that felt almost spiritual. The slow rhythm of breathing, the soft rustle of clothes, The gentle flicker of candles, these sounds blended into a quiet symphony that soothed weary souls. Many who came were not seeking a thrill, but a respite from exhaustion. They were tired of pretending, tired of being strong, tired of maintaining a perfect exterior in a world that demanded it. In the dim light, they finally allowed themselves to be fragile. For some, the experience brought clarity, not just escape. Visions didn't always twist reality. Sometimes, they sharpened it. Memories long buried under years of pride would resurface. Childhood laughter, faces thought forgotten, regrets that could no longer be ignored, all floated to the surface. These moments could be comforting or painful, but they were always deeply human. The dens became confessionals without priests, therapy rooms without doctors, where the only guide was the drifting haze and one's own conscience. There were moments when time seemed to stop entirely. A person might lie motionless, eyes half open, staring at patterns in the carpet, convinced they were witnessing something profound. Thoughts would slow until a single idea filled the entire mind like a vast ocean. Some found peace in this stillness. Others found fear. Not everyone was ready to meet themselves so intimately, to look that deeply inward. For those unprepared, the visions could feel like standing too close to an emotional storm with no shelter. Friendships formed in these quiet spaces, often without a single name exchanged. Two strangers might sit near each other night after night, finding companionship in shared silence. A knowing glance was a conversation, a small smile, a reassurance. Humanity revealed itself in the simplest gestures, a hand steadying another's, a blanket offered without being asked, or a calm voice whispering that the visions would pass, that reality would return. These dens were places where empathy could survive, even when the mind drifted far away. There were caretakers, two quiet figures who moved through the rooms, understanding the space better than anyone. They knew when to speak and when to stay silent. They could tell the difference between a mind peacefully dreaming and one quietly struggling. Their presence kept the dens balanced, guiding the fragile ritual that unfolded each night. They never judged. They had seen countless faces, countless reasons, and understood that nearly everyone came for the same thing: to feel less burdened, to feel more alive, or simply to feel something different from what everyday life offered. Outside, the empire continued its endless cycle of trade, prayer, and politics. But inside these dens, lives unfolded in entirely separate emotional dimensions. Some evenings brought soft, genuine laughter when visions turned playful or absurd. Other nights invited quiet tears, finally released after years of being held back. And sometimes, there was just a deep stillness, as if the entire room was sharing one collective breath. An unspoken understanding existed among those who visited often. They knew these experiences could heal, but they also knew they could change a person in ways that were hard to reverse. Returning to ordinary life could feel jarring. The streets seemed duller, conversations shallower, responsibilities regained their weight all too quickly. Some managed this transition with grace. Others struggled, living between two worlds without fully belonging to either. Yet, despite the risks, the dens remained places of profound human experience. They held secrets, dreams, fears, and longings in their smoky air. They were witnesses to the silent battles of the heart and mind, sanctuaries where people dared to confront what they normally ran from. They were mirrors reflecting hidden truths, even uncomfortable ones. And so, the nights continued. New visitors arrived with hesitant steps and curious eyes. Regulars returned like tired travelers seeking a familiar rest. The candles were lit, the pipes prepared, and the smoke rose slowly into the quiet air. Once more, minds drifted into realms where reality blurred with imagination, where burdens loosened their grip, and where Istanbul's dreameters surrendered to the strange, delicate balance between relief and risk, beauty and uncertainty, awakening and escape. In the quiet, hidden corners of Istanbul, the opium dens continued to breathe, and within their walls, a silent transformation was taking place. For some who entered, these rooms became more than a temporary escape. They became entire chapters of their lives. Nights spent in the drifting smoke etched themselves into memory, shaping thoughts, decisions, and the very way people saw themselves. Each visit added a new layer of experience, sometimes comforting, sometimes haunting, but always unforgettable. It was as if the dens held a mirror to the soul, and once someone looked, they could never fully unsee what they had witnessed within. There was something strangely ritualistic about it all. People didn't just arrive and leave, they transitioned. Before entering, you could feel the hesitation, the final deep breaths, the flickers of uncertainty. But inside, there was surrender not forced, but gently chosen. The soft lighting calmed the mind, plush cushions welcomed tired bodies, and the drifting haze invited thoughts to loosen their grip. By the time patrons left, they were changed in subtle ways. Even if the outside world couldn't see it, the dens had become part of their emotional landscape, tucked away like a secret diary entry. Even the caretakers noticed this shift. They saw people return, not just seeking escape anymore, but seeking understanding. Some began to approach the dens with a clear purpose, to think deeply, to reflect on choices, to unravel the tangled emotions that everyday life never gave them time to face. It wasn't just indulgence, it was quiet introspection, disguised in drifting smoke. Here, hearts untangled themselves, minds explored paths they'd never taken, and buried dreams resurfaced in fragments of imagination. Sometimes, these realizations inspired change. Other times, they simply provided comfort, a reminder that beneath all the stress and structure, a complex inner world still existed, waiting to be explored. But the dens also held a deep uncertainty. Not every vision brought comfort. Some moments revealed fears that people tried so hard to ignore. Memories that hurt to remember would surface without warning. The mind, once loosened, did not always choose the gentle paths. The emotional honesty that emerged could be both healing and deeply unsettling. Even in that peaceful atmosphere, vulnerability carried a heavy weight, and yet people continued to return. Perhaps it was human nature to face what frightened them in controlled shadows rather than in the harsh, revealing light of day. The nights themselves felt like characters in this story. Early evening carried anticipation, as lanterns were first lit and the world outside began to quiet down. Midnight brought a profound depth when emotions softened and thoughts stretched into new territories. Then, the approaching dawn held a strange sadness as dreams slowly faded and the return to reality drew near. Patrons often lingered during those final quiet minutes, caught between staying and stepping back into the day. Many delayed their departure, savoring the last traces of calm, knowing that once they walked out, the city would resume its loud chorus of responsibilities, expectations, and routines. Outside, Istanbul never stopped being magnificent. The call to prayer echoed across the rooftops. The Bosphorus shimmered with reflections of moonlight and early dawn. Markets woke with a bustling energy. Life continued with its beautiful and demanding rhythm. But for those who had spent the night inside the dens, the city looked slightly different. The streets felt layered with meaning. Reality seemed strangely delicate, and even ordinary sounds carried emotional echoes. They walked among the crowds, silently aware that they had seen and felt something most people never would. There were also those who quietly stepped away from the dens forever, not out of fear, but because they believed they had received what they came for. Some found peace and no longer needed the escape. Others realized that too much of this world might pull them too far from their own reality. Leaving wasn't always dramatic. Often, it was just a quiet decision one last night, one final inhale, one final moment of stillness, and then a silent promise to move forward without returning. The dens accepted this without judgment. They never chased. They simply waited, knowing that life itself would decide who returned and who did not. Yet, many could never fully forget the experience. Even if they moved on, something stayed with them, the memory of human stillness, the softness of dim light, the depth of inner thought, the feeling of existing for a moment without the fear of judgment, in a world so often shaped by rules, expectations, and appearances. The opium dens had been places of raw, unfiltered humanity, imperfect, emotional, honest. And so, the nights continued. New dream seekers arrived, unsure yet curious. Familiar faces returned with weary hearts. Candles flickered again. Smoke began its slow dance through the air. The rooms filled once more with unspoken thoughts, half-muttered words, quiet sighs, and distant gazes. The dens remained exactly what they had always been, silent witnesses to hidden emotions, private struggles, fragile dreams, and the delicate line between escape and understanding. In Istanbul, where history, culture, and life intertwined in layers upon layers, these hidden rooms carried their own silent legacy, not carved in stone, not written in records, but carried gently in the minds and hearts of those who once surrendered to their shadows and dared to wander into the fragile depths of their own dreams. With each passing year, the opium dens of Istanbul settled into the city's emotional landscape, not as mere hideaways, but as quiet, unseen landmarks. They never appeared on any map, and no tour guide would ever point them out with pride. Yet, their presence was a constant murmur in whispered conversations, in the knowing glances shared between strangers, and in stories told softly behind closed doors. They were the city's open secret places everyone knew existed, but no one dared acknowledge aloud, as if speaking their name would shatter the fragile peace that allowed them to thrive. For those who crossed their thresholds, a profound truth emerged. These dens weren't just places to escape from life. They were places where one learned how deeply they were actually living. The dreams, the visions, the swirling reflections, they didn't detach people from reality. Instead, they forced them to see it from angles they never imagined. A merchant, who'd spent a lifetime counting profits, suddenly remembered he had forgotten the feeling of pure joy. A scholar, surrounded by endless books, was struck by how little he truly understood about himself. A lonely soul, wrapped in years of silence, rediscovered emotions he thought had long since vanished. In these rooms, shrouded in smoke and softness, ordinary minds quietly transformed into wandering philosophers. But the nights often revealed something else, something more universal. The immense loneliness that can exist even in the most crowded of cities. People with families, with responsibilities, with busy lives, could still feel utterly isolated within themselves. In the dim, flickering light of the dens, that loneliness no longer had to hide. It could emerge, fragile and honest. And here, instead of being ignored, it was finally felt. It wasn't always solved, but it was acknowledged. And sometimes, simply acknowledging a feeling like loneliness is a form of healing in itself, like taking a deep breath after holding it for years. There was a strange and quiet beauty in watching strangers exist together in peaceful silence. No one needed to impress anyone else. Status and titles were left at the door. It made no difference who was powerful outside these walls, or who was struggling just to survive. In here, people were simply human, breathing, thinking, feeling, drifting. The cushions beneath them had absorbed the weight of countless unspoken stories. The lanterns had illuminated thousands of quiet epiphanies. The walls themselves had listened to more silent emotions than most people will ever witness in a lifetime. Some nights felt like dreams themselves. The air would grow heavier, the silence deeper, the emotions more raw and delicate. In those moments, patrons closed their eyes, not to escape, but to explore. Their minds would wander through memories like old familiar streets, revisiting faces, moments, hopes, and regrets. Sometimes, they found a way to forgive themselves. Other times, they wished they could turn back the clock and change what was unchangeable. But there was always honesty. Honesty comes easiest when the world finally stops demanding you to be strong. The caretakers watched over it all, their silence a testament to their deep understanding. They learned to sense an emotional storm before it broke, to recognize when someone needed a calming presence, and when someone else simply needed space. They understood that not all silence comes from peace. Some is born from a deep, internal struggle. They never tried to control the emotions in the room, only to guide them gently, like steady hands protecting a trembling flame, ensuring it neither burned out nor raged out of control. Their role wasn't one of power, but it was profoundly important. Meanwhile, outside, life never slowed. The empire pulsed with the rhythms of trade, prayer, celebration, and duty. Children grew into adults. Dreams hardened into responsibilities. Time marched relentlessly forward. But for those who had stepped inside the dens, time no longer felt like a straight line. It felt layered, textured. Life had more depth now. Feelings had context. It was no longer something to simply be endured, but something to be observed, questioned, understood, and truly felt. Some visitors began to see the dens as teachers, not moral teachers or spiritual guides, but emotional ones. They revealed that behind every composed face, there exists an entire universe of thought, memory, pain, and hope. It became easier to look at others with softer eyes. If a stranger on the street seemed distant, perhaps they were carrying heavy thoughts. If someone spoke with a harsh tone, perhaps they were fighting a silent battle inside. In their own quiet, smoky way, the dens taught empathy. But no matter how deep the reflections went, reality always called them back. Dawn would creep into the sky with a gentle, unavoidable persistence. The city would slowly brighten, the air growing fresher, the lanterns burning low. People rose from their cushions, their movements slow and deliberate, as if each gesture now carried meaning. Those first steps back into the world often felt surreal, like returning from a distant land that existed only in the mind. The streets seemed louder, the light sharper. Everyday life felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. Yet, walking away, there was always a sense of having gained something subtle but powerful. Not every question had been answered, but something inside felt a little clearer. Not every sadness had vanished, but it felt a little more understood. And understanding, even without a solution, has its own quiet way of healing. And so the story continued, night after night, dream after dream, reflection after reflection. The dens remained patient, loyal to their purpose, holding the emotional weight of countless souls gently in their shadows. They were never celebrated as monuments of Istanbul, yet they were an unforgettable part of the human experience within it. They were the places where the city's hidden heart beat, where wandering minds found brief freedom, and where people rested quietly in smoke and silence, suspended between the life they lived and the thoughts they rarely allowed themselves to feel. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this story thought-provoking, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the hidden corners of history and the human mind. The nights in Istanbul sometimes felt endless, as though the city refused to let its memories rest. By this point in the story, the atmosphere inside the hidden dens had changed. The air was no longer simply thick with the scent of dreams. It now carried the heavy weight of choices, of regrets, and of lives slowly, almost imperceptibly, slipping away from clarity. People no longer came here seeking excitement or some forgotten wonder. They came chasing silence. They came for numbness, for a momentary break from the burdens that life pressed upon them day after day. Those who gathered in these dim, quiet rooms were no longer strangers to one another. They were quiet figures, sharing the same slowly sinking ship, each silently aware of the damage but unable, or perhaps unwilling, to turn away. Some arrived wrapped in the finest silks, their wealth a thin cloak against the chill of their own thoughts. Others came in with the exhaustion of a long day's labor etched into their faces. But inside these rooms, the outside world simply disappeared. All of Istanbul's grandeur, its magnificent palaces, its towering mosques, the bustling markets, and the shining waters of the Bosphorus felt distant, like a memory from another life, something beautiful but unreachable. Here, time seemed to slow down. The lanterns burned softly, casting weary faces in a light of fading gold, while minds wandered through memories that many wished they could erase. Every corner seemed to hold a human story, every shadow a life slowly fading into silence. There were men who once spoke with booming confidence in public squares, who now barely whispered to themselves in the privacy of these rooms. There were women whose laughter once filled elegant halls, now sitting wordless, their eyes lost in a distant, hollow emptiness. Regret, loneliness, heartbreak, and sheer exhaustion lived quietly in these rooms. It was not a loud, dramatic destruction. It was a gentle surrender, the kind that feels comforting, almost like a warm embrace, while it quietly takes everything away from you. The most haunting part of it all was the slow, almost graceful decline. There was no sudden collapse, no single, dramatic tragedy to point to. It was just a series of small, heartbreaking changes over time. Someone who once arrived with a proud, confident stride now came with tired, shuffling steps. Someone who once spoke endlessly of their dreams for the future no longer mentioned tomorrow. The spark that once defined them, that made them who they were, dimmed little by little, almost unnoticed. That slow fading invisible to the world outside was the true tragedy of these dens. And yet, beyond these hidden rooms, Istanbul continued to live. The first light of dawn still touched the Bosphorus, painting the water in shades of pink and gold. The markets still filled with a cacophony of voices, the scent of spices and fresh bread. Families still gathered for dinner, sharing stories and laughter. The city kept moving forward, its vibrant heartbeat a stark contrast to the silence within these walls. Those inside felt utterly separated from it, as if they were living in a different world entirely. Many of them convinced themselves they could leave any time they wanted. It's just temporary, they would say, to themselves and to anyone who would listen. Just a brief escape. But slowly, without them even realizing it, the escape stopped feeling like a choice. It became a dependency, a need they struggled to recognize, let alone admit. Stories drifted through the rooms like whispers on the smoke-filled air. Stories of lost dreams, of broken trust, of fortunes ruined not by bad luck, but by a series of small, poor choices. Stories of hearts so deeply scarred by disappointment that they no longer knew how to feel anything else. Istanbul was a magnificent city, But for those who stumbled, for those who lost their way, its beauty could feel unforgiving, almost mocking. Some found these dens because they believed they had nowhere else to carry their pain. Here, no one questioned them, no one judged them. The silence was a balm for their wounded souls. But that silence came with a cost, a price far greater than any of them could have imagined at the start. Even those who smiled, who put on a brave face, were not free. Some pretended to be unaffected, insisting they were in control, refusing to admit how deeply this habit had woven itself into the fabric of their lives. But the truth was quieter and far more dangerous. Once a person begins escaping life instead of facing it, the path back becomes more difficult with each passing night. The journey back grows longer and steeper, until it feels almost impossible to climb. The attendants, the silent observers of countless stories, understood this better than anyone. They were the keepers of these hidden worlds, and they watched it all unfold. They watched confidence turn into crippling uncertainty. They watched bright, promising lives grow dim and faint. They watched hope arrive full and vibrant, only to leave half empty, a shadow of its former self. They never interfered. They simply witnessed the reality that so few wanted to accept. Almost everyone who stayed too long was changed forever. By now, Istanbul's hidden dreamers were no longer myths or whispers told in hushed tones. They were a quiet community, living beneath the city's glittering surface and seen, unheard, but heartbreakingly real. These rooms became mirrors of human vulnerability, reflecting just how easily people can lose themselves while trying to escape emotional pain. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction or mental health, please know there is help available. You are not alone, and reaching out is a sign of incredible strength. You can find resources in the description below. And as the lanterns flickered through yet another long silent night, the city above rested peacefully, unaware of the countless Bosat souls drifting farther and farther from the world, suspended in a space between reality and dream streams that no longer healed but only consumed. As our story deepens, the opium dens of Istanbul are no longer just hidden corners of temptation. They've become entire worlds suspended beneath the city's surface, worlds that have learned to breathe on their own. Here, nights stretch into eternity, and the people inside don't look like visitors anymore. They look like residents of a twilight existence, moving slowly through shadows that feel softer than daylight, speaking in voices that rarely rise above a whisper. The lamps glow like tired moons, and the carpets seem to have absorbed the weight of countless forgotten hopes. Outside, Istanbul continues to dazzle. The Bosphorus carries the shimmering reflections of palaces and passing ships. The call to prayer flows gently over the rooftops. The markets are a riot of color, laughter, bargaining, and the rich aroma of food. But just beneath that living heartbeat exists this quiet realm where life itself has paused. The contrast between the world above and the world below is heartbreaking. A vibrant, thriving city layered directly over rooms filled with drifting souls. It's as if Istanbul has two faces, one proudly facing the world, and another, hidden one, carrying the fragile parts of humanity it refuses to show. Those who spend their nights here have stopped arguing with themselves. In the beginning, there was always that inner resistance, the promises whispered to oneself, just for tonight, only for a little while, I'll stop soon. But by now, most of those promises have faded away like smoke. Instead, there's a quiet acceptance of the rhythm of this strange life. They know the attendants' silent gestures, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the way the air grows still when everyone settles into a shared silence. It has become a ritual, almost sacred in its stillness, almost peaceful in its profound danger. Conversations happen, but they're not like the ones outside. No one speaks of schedules or responsibilities. No one debates loudly. Instead, you hear murmured confessions, half-formed thoughts, and stories told so softly it feels like the walls themselves are leaning in to listen. A man might suddenly start speaking about a love he lost years ago, and those around him will just listen, without judgment. A woman might describe a future she knows she never reach, and no one corrects her. Here, people don't argue with dreams, they simply let them flow. There's something strangely human in this quiet acceptance. These dens aren't filled with villains or monsters. They are filled with people who tried to be strong for too long. People who once smiled bravely while something inside them was already breaking. The world outside demands strength, control, composure. But inside these dim rooms, weakness is allowed to breathe freely. Pain doesn't have to hide. Tears can fall without needing an explanation. It is deeply sad, yes, but it is also painfully honest. Some regulars have reached a stage where illusion feels safer than the truth. They tell themselves the world beyond the den is too loud, too demanding, too harsh. They say the dens are kinder because they ask for nothing in return. No expectations, no failures, just soft lights, drifting thoughts, and moments where time seems to forget them. But kindness is a dangerous word here. The dens don't hurt like a sudden storm. They hurt like a slow tide, gently pulling away pieces of a life until one day, very little remains. Yet, even in this slow decay, tenderness exists. You see these small moments of quiet care, someone adjusting a blanket for another who has fallen asleep against the wall, someone offering a glass of water, a whispered reassurance when panic flickers across tired eyes. These small gestures are a reminder that even among those drifting toward their own shadows, humanity refuses to completely disappear. Broken souls still recognize each other, still reach out, and still refuse to be entirely cold. And there are always newcomers. They enter nervously, pretending they just want to see what it's like. They walk past the door, hesitate, then step inside with that mix of curiosity and denial that the regulars recognize instantly. The first time always feels different. The room seems mysterious, dangerous, almost thrilling. The newcomer sits straighter, telling themselves this is just a glimpse into another world. The regulars watch quietly. They've seen this beginning many times before, and they know how fragile the first steps into darkness can be. Some newcomers never return. Reality frightens them enough to pull them back. They walk out, shaken, and decide they can't belong to such a silent world. But others come back, again and again. Each return wears away a little more hesitation, a little more fear, replacing it with a sense of familiarity. Soon, they walk in as if they've always belonged. This is how this hidden society grows, not loudly or dramatically, but gently, through repeated choices wrapped in a deceptive softness. The attendants have learned to read lives in silence. They can see which visitor carries sadness, which carries exhaustion, disappointment, or guilt. They say nothing, because their role is not to question. Their presence is steady, almost invisible, like pillars supporting a collapsing ceiling. They are witnesses to countless unspoken tragedies, the keepers of memories that were never meant to be shared with the world. Their expressions rarely change, but deep down, they know they stand in places where hope slowly forgets how to stand on its own. Outside, dawn always arrives. Light spills through the streets, merchants begin their day, footsteps multiply, and life moves forward with determination. But down here, dawn has a different meaning. Sometimes it brings shame, sometimes quiet relief, and sometimes it brings nothing at all, because the night inside feels stronger than the morning outside. People blink slowly, pulled reluctantly back toward the world they had escaped, already promising themselves they'll return when the weight of life becomes too much again. And so, Istanbul exists in layers, the glittering city everyone sees, and this hidden world beneath it, where people come not to be wild, but to rest from the battle of living. These are not places of noise or excitement. They are places of surrender, reflection, and a slow, quiet fading. The dream eaters of Istanbul are not chasing pleasure anymore. They are chasing silence, understanding, and the feeling, even for just a moment, that they are no longer alone in their pain. By the time this final chapter unfolds, the opium dens of Istanbul feel less like hidden places and more like fading memories, suspended just beneath the city's vibrant heartbeat. The rooms are still dim, the lamps still glow with a tired golden light, and the carpets still hold the weight of countless footsteps. But something in the air has changed. What once felt like an endless refuge now feels like a space slowly taking its last breath. Even the silence seems different, no longer protective, but reflective, as if the walls themselves are aware that nothing in life can remain untouched by time. The people who still gather here sense it too. They no longer come only to escape. They come because they are standing at a fragile crossroads, where every quiet breath asks a simple, powerful question: stay or return? For years, these rooms softened the harshness of reality, wrapping drifting souls in a haze of gentleness. But now, some begin to see what they once refused to admit. The softness did not save them. It simply delayed the moments they were afraid to face. Time didn't stop here. It simply slipped away, quietly. There are quiet awakenings, no grand scenes, no dramatic speeches, only subtle changes in the stillness. A man who always sat silently in the same corner suddenly realizes he is tired of watching life from behind a curtain of smoke. His voice trembles, yet it carries a newfound strength when he admits that he doesn't want to disappear slowly. He wants to remember what it feels like to truly exist. A woman, once convinced she had nothing left beyond these walls, closes her eyes and remembers laughter, the sound of living streets, and voices calling her name. She discovers that memory doesn't hurt anymore. It warms her. For the first time, she begins to wonder if there might still be a place for her in the world she abandoned. But the choice is not the same for everyone. Some look at the world outside and still see only noise, pressure, and expectations too heavy to bear. For them, these rooms don't feel like prisons. They feel like the last quiet shore in a storm that never stopped raging. They choose to stay, not out of weakness, but out of a deep exhaustion and acceptance. Their path is softer, quieter, and deeply human. Every heart here follows its own truth, and that truth does not look the same for all. The attendants, those silent guardians who have watched souls arrive, unravel, heal, or fade, sense the ending approaching they move with the same calm grace, offering presence rather than judgment, comfort rather than control. They know they cannot rewrite anyone's story, but they have carried these stories with care. They understand that what existed here will not exist again in the same way. As the world outside grows louder, more modern, more watchful, these secret rooms begin to feel like relics of a quieter, more hidden sorrow. Beyond these walls, Istanbul continues to breathe with an ageless beauty. The Bosphorus still glitters beneath the moonlight like a ribbon of silver. Bridges glow softly against the night, mosques rise proudly above the city, prayers drift gently across rooftops, tea houses buzz with life, and merchants fill the streets with color and sound. The city has always carried sorrow and magnificence side by side, and as the dens begin fading out of existence, they simply slip into the deeper layers of its memory. Slowly, fewer footsteps descend into these hidden spaces. Those who step back into the daylight do so hesitantly, blinking against the brightness, feeling overwhelmed by sound and movement. The first days are difficult, confusing, even painful, but they also bring something the dens could never offer. They bring feeling, warmth, laughter, disappointment, fear, hope, real life, in all of its chaos and tenderness. And with every shaky step forward, the realization grows stronger. Escaping pain also means escaping joy, and no soul was ever meant to live without feeling. Those who remain do not disappear in tragedy. They fade gently, wrapped in quiet acceptance. Their story doesn't shout at whispers. Their final days in these spaces are filled not with despair, but with soft reflection, human vulnerability, and a calm kind of peace. These dens, once filled with drifting dreams, become places of silent companionship for those who choose stillness instead of struggle. In time, the opium dens of Istanbul become stories rather than destinations. They live on in whispered memories, in history, in the city's deep emotional layers. They are remembered not as a scandal, but as a sorrow wrapped in tenderness, a chapter where broken hearts came to rest when the world felt too heavy. They stand as reminders that beneath every shining empire, beneath every proud civilization, there are always hidden rooms where fragile human hearts quietly exist. The dream eaters of Istanbul were never villains. They were people who reached moments where pain grew heavier than hope. Some returned to the world, some remained in the quiet, all left behind echoes that the city still carries gently. And as night continues to fall over Istanbul, and the Bosphorus shimmers under starlight, it feels as if the city itself remembers them not with judgment, but with understanding. Their story ends, not with noise, but with a soft truth. They came searching for silence, for rest, for escape, and in doing so, they revealed something timeless about what it means to be human. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the quiet corners of history. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video,